Alright, so today I want to compare the difference between the enhancer gene and the desert ghost gene in ball pythons. And if you've been in ball pythons for a while, you may have heard of the desert ghost. It's been around for a while. As a matter of fact, I actually breed desert ghost here in my collection. It's actually a recessive mutation. And one of my favorite combinations is the pastel desert ghost. Probably one of the brightest and flashiest snakes that I've actually seen. And the enhancer actually came out about 10 years after the desert ghost. So it's relatively new on the scene compared to the desert ghost. And as far as the story goes, someone actually imported a snake, an African import, and it kind of had an unusual color, and they named it the enhancer. And come to find out, they actually took the enhancer, bred it into a desert ghost, and found out it's compatible. So you can have a double het fur desert ghost, het fur enhancer that actually looks like a visual. And kind of the tough part about the project is the desert ghost and the enhancer can look really variable from one example to the other. So today I wanted to jump over the internet and I wanted to compare side by side the enhancer and the desert ghost gene in ball pythons. Alright, so I want to jump over here at Morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is a visual desert ghost with 2 copies of the desert ghost gene. And the desert ghost can really vary from one example of the gene to the other. Sometimes they can be really super bright yellow like this one here, and sometimes they can be almost axanthic looking. And the desert ghost can kind of trick you into thinking there might be other genes in your desert ghost. And especially with this one, it looks like almost as bright as some of the brightest pastels, and you may be tricked into thinking there's pastel in this desert ghost, although it's just part of the desert ghost gene, which is kind of interesting. Usually with your pastel desert ghost, usually you have a really white spot on top of the head. It really fades out the top of the head on your pastel desert ghost, especially with your super pastel desert ghost. It can completely wash out the top of the head. So you can definitely tell in this one there's no pastel in the mix, even though it's super bright. And another confusing thing about the desert ghost is a lot of times you'll have a really reduced pattern that looks almost like an enchi. I've actually seen some enchis with a pattern pretty much exactly like this. With sometimes the enchis will have kind of these tiger stripes, and it kind of wipes out all the alien heads and reduces the pattern all through the snake. Then that is just a characteristic of the desert ghost. As a matter of fact, I actually have a male pastel desert ghost. I bought it as a pastel desert ghost, and later on I found out it has enchi in the mix, and it looks, I'd say it looks almost exactly like this. It's pretty amazing. And the way I found out it has enchi in it is I took that male and I bred it to some other females in my collection that were non-visual desert ghosts, and I produced all 100% het desert ghosts, and some of those offspring actually came out as enchis, really reduced pattern enchis. So pretty much I proved it out by breeding it and looking at the offspring. So I definitely know there is enchi in my pastel desert ghost male, which is kind of interesting. So if you actually look at the different versions of the desert ghost, you can see this one is really super bright yellow. And here's another one. This is another desert ghost. Pretty amazing that they can really vary from one example of the gene to the other. And this one is really, it's like all the color is removed. And I've actually seen people breed these together, where you actually take one of these axanthic looking desert ghosts, breed it to one of the bright yellow ones, and the offspring will kind of be halfway in between the two. And as far as what I've seen, it looks like if you start with one of the bright yellow ones as a hatchling, it pretty much retains the bright yellow color as it ages and matures. It doesn't really transform from one to the other, which is kind of interesting. So take a look at this one. This is actually an enhancer. So the enhancer is really close to the desert ghost, and it can really vary as far as the different versions of the enhancers. So sometimes you can get really bright ones. Sometimes you can get an almost axanthic looking enhancer, which is kind of interesting. I'm pretty sure the original enhancers came from one single snake in the wild. It's kind of interesting how it was, people keep breeding them over and over, and pretty soon we have all these variations in not only the desert ghost but the enhancer, which kind of makes you think that they may be the same gene, which is pretty interesting. You can see on this one, it's really super bright and clean. It looks almost exactly the same as the desert ghost. I actually pulled up another one over here. Take a look at this. This is the axanthic version of the enhancer, which is kind of interesting from one type of kind of like a small subtlety as far as one version of the Gene to the other. You can definitely tell in this one, it has a little bit more color in the mix compared to some of the Desert Ghosts. But you know, the more I look at them kind of side by side, the more I'm thinking they are almost exactly the same, especially if you can actually take one enhancer and breed it to a Desert Ghost and get the visual offsprings. If you actually come over here to morphmarket.com, I was actually looking at some of the combinations. There's not a whole lot of combinations as far as the enhancer, but I kind of wanted to compare the enhancer combination versus the Desert Ghost. And one of the best ones I can find was the genetic stripe, which is pretty amazing. You actually mix the Desert Ghost with the genetic stripe and you get a snake that looks like this. And I was looking at a whole bunch of different examples and it pretty much looks the same between the Desert Ghost and the enhancer. So this is the Desert Ghost version of the Desert Ghost genetic stripe, and here is the enhancer version of the same thing, and they're really close, really similar as far as one to the other, sometimes almost indistinguishable. And kind of the hard part comparing them side by side is there are differences, huge differences in the different versions of each gene. So sometimes it's hard to actually, you know, really compare them side by side. Pretty much the only way you could do it is if you had two lines, enhancer versus Desert Ghost, that were almost exactly the same as far as the color of the snake, which is, I think it'd be a little bit challenging to compare them side by side. So if you actually come over here to Morphmarket, take a look at this. I actually searched for all the Desert Ghosts, the visual Desert Ghosts, the ones that were for sale and the ones that have sold, and there's almost 1,600 Desert Ghosts that have been posted over here on Morphmarket. And if you actually do the same thing with the enhancer, take a look at this. This is kind of crazy. There's only been 26 enhancers over here on Morphmarket. 26 compared to 1,600 versus the enhancer versus the Desert Ghost. So let me tell you, if you're looking for enhancers, sometimes, you know, sometimes if you actually want to invest in a project, sometimes it can be pretty hard, especially if there's just a few available. And some of these are super expensive. The Desert Ghost and the enhancers, a lot of people are going for some combinations in some of these, like for example, this one right here, enhancer het clown from 2020. This is actually $3,500, which is pretty crazy. As a matter of fact, I actually bought two Desert Ghosts. I think it's been about 4 years since I bought my Desert Ghost, and it's hatchlings. I think I bought the pair of them. I think it was close to $2,000, anywhere from, I think it was like $1,500 to $2,000 for the pair. And even today, they've really held their value, and you can actually sell them for pretty much the same price, which is pretty amazing to hold their value over 5 years. So I actually wanted to show you this here right at the end. So this is kind of interesting. A lot of people are actually convinced that the enhancer is the same thing as the Desert Ghost. And a lot of ads over here will actually list snakes as the enhancer, and then they'll actually put in parentheses the Desert Ghost. So I'd say it's kind of similar to, I think it's a little bit different than the banana and the coral glow. I'd say it's a little, maybe on par with like the butter and the lesser, where some people think it's the same. But personally, what I would actually do, if you're actually working with the enhancer and the Desert Ghost, I would definitely keep the lines separate and not breed them together, because it can get a little bit confusing, especially with the recessive. You know, you mix the enhancer with the Desert Ghost, and then you have the, you know, it's essentially a double het. You'd have het enhancer and het Desert Ghost, and then everything you bred with that, you'd have to list it as an enhancer / Desert Ghost, and it kind of blurs the line between the two. So some people think it's the same, some people think it's different. I'm convinced that they're different lines of the same gene and probably shouldn't be bred together. All right, so what is time for the question of the day? And Alan Blevins asks, which disinfectant do you use now that F10 seems to be discontinued? And that is a very good question. So for quite a few years, I was actually using the F10 veterinary disinfectant to disinfect all my snake enclosures. And it's actually sold as a concentrate. So you can actually take the F10 and make gallons and gallons of F10 solution, which works really well. And for some reason, recently here, probably in the last year, maybe 8 months to a year, I've had a problem finding the F10 F10 solution over here in the United States. And kind of the interesting thing is you can actually go over to eBay and find F10, but it's only sold in the UK. And if you actually buy it in the UK and have it shipped over to the United States, the shipping is outrageous. It ends up being like $100 a bottle or something crazy like that, where I think I was paying like, I think it was like $13 a bottle when I was buying F10 or something like that. So the next best thing that I actually use is a chlorhexidine solution. I actually have some here, and I was using this at the beginning before I switched to F10, and this is actually chlorhexidine gluconate. It's actually a blue solution. This is also a concentrate, so this goes a long way. You can actually add this to water and make gallons and gallons and gallons of a disinfectant solution of the chlorhexidine. And one of the things I found with the chlorhexidine is if you actually mix it up according to the directions, which is 2 tablespoons per gallon of water, that it's not really as strong as the F10 solution. So what I actually do is I use 2 tablespoons per quart of the chlorhexidine, and that almost seems to be equivalent to the F10 solution. Let me tell you, chlorhexidine is pretty cheap. I'll actually put a link to an Amazon link down below in the description where you can actually go and buy some chlorhexidine. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.